Night Shift at the Hospital. Confronting Hidden Evil. Part 7. The Plea for Help. Night had fallen over the hospital, cloaking its long corridors and patient rooms in shadows that seemed to whisper and shift. The air was thick with an uneasy stillness, as if the entire building held its breath. Hannah walked the halls, her footsteps echoing on the polished linoleum. The faint glow of emergency lights did little to dispel the darkness that pressed in around her. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching her every move. The silence was oppressive, but Hannah had grown accustomed to it, or so she thought. She had just reached the end of the corridor when she heard it, a voice faint and trembling, calling out from somewhere deep within the hospital's labyrinthine halls. "Help me." The voice was small, fragile, unmistakably that of a child. Hannah's heart stopped, then raced. The air around her turned cold, and a chill ran down her spine. She turned, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice cracking. The only response was a soft sob, echoing down the empty corridor. Hannah's hand shook as she fumbled for her flashlight. She clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty walls. "Please, don't do this," she whispered, more to herself than to the presence she felt around her. She had seen too much, felt too much, to dismiss this as a trick of her imagination. "Where are you?" she demanded, her voice stronger this time. Here the voice came from behind her, so close it felt like icy breath on her neck. She spun around, the flashlight trembling in her grip. The corridor was empty, but then she saw it, a faint, flickering shape at the edge of the light. A small figure, barely more than a shadow, but unmistakably a child. His eyes were wide, filled with fear and longing. "Help me," he whispered again, his voice cracking with desperation. Hannah's throat tightened. I don't know how," she said, her voice shaking. She took a hesitant step closer, but the figure retreated, fading into the shadows. "Wait," she cried, panic rising in her chest. "Please, I want to help." The temperature plummeted further, and the air became thick with the scent of decay. Shadows moved along the walls, coiling and shifting like living things. The child's voice echoed again, but this time it was joined by others' cries, whispers, sobs, a cacophony of pain and despair. Hannah stumbled backward, her back pressing against the cold wall. No, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. This can't be real, but it was real. The spirits were all around her, their presence tangible, their pain suffocating. She could feel their desperation, their need to be heard, to be freed. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. These weren't just ghosts, they were souls trapped in torment, unable to move on. Something was holding them here, something dark and cruel. Footsteps pounded down the corridor, and suddenly Laura was there, her face pale and drawn. "I heard it too," she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "The child, the voices, they're everywhere, they're trapped," Hannah said, her voice raw. "They can't leave, they're begging for help." Laura nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "We have to do something. We can't just leave them like this." The two women stood together, their fear giving way to determination. But the spirits had other plans. The temperature dropped again, and the walls themselves seemed to groan under the weight of so much anguish. Shadows surged forward, wrapping around them like tendrils of smoke. The cries grew louder, more desperate, each one a plea that pierced their hearts. "Why are you here?" Hannah shouted, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" The shadows twisted, and the child's form appeared again, his face etched with sorrow. "We were forgotten," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Left to suffer. To die." He reached out a hand, small and pale. "You have to help us. Please." Hannah's breath caught. "How?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Tell me how." But before he could answer, the shadows recoiled violently, as if something or someone was pulling them back. The child's form flickered and began to fade. "No," Hannah cried, reaching out, but her hand passed through empty air. "Don't go." The cries became a wail, a deafening chorus of anguish that threatened to drown her. She fell to her knees, clutching her head as the sound reverberated through her skull. Beside her, Laura was sobbing, her hands pressed to her ears. "They're in pain," she choked out. So much pain the wails stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Hannah and Laura gasped for breath, the weight of the spirit's torment still pressing down on them. "We have to find out what happened to them," Laura said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We have to end this." Hannah nodded, her resolve hardening. Whatever had trapped these spirits, whatever darkness had taken root in the hospital, they would find it. They would free the souls that had been forgotten and left to suffer. But as they stood, the cold lingered, and the shadows seemed to watch, waiting. That night, neither of them slept. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the windows set their nerves on edge. The child's play echoed in Hannah's mind, a haunting reminder of the task ahead. You have to help us, she couldn't fail him. She wouldn't. The next day, they began their search in earnest. They scoured records, interviewed staff, and combed through the hospital's dark history. What they found was a web of neglect, of secrets buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and denial. Mothers and children who had died under mysterious circumstances, their deaths dismissed or forgotten. It was no accident. Someone or something had orchestrated their suffering. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the supernatural presence grew more desperate. The spirit's craze became more frequent, their pleas more insistent. Hannah and Laura found themselves constantly on edge, haunted by visions of the past. Shadows moved with purpose now. Cold spots lingered in rooms where no one had died in decades, and the scent of decay became a constant reminder of the hospital's dark legacy. One night, as they pored over their findings in the dim light of the library, the temperature plummeted once more. The child appeared, his form flickering, his eyes filled with desperation. "Time is running out," he said, his voice trembling. "You must end what Hannah demanded, her voice tight with fear and determination. "What's keeping you here?" But before he could answer, the shadows surged again, dragging him back. His cry echoed in the silence, a final, desperate plea. "Please, don't forget us." The room fell silent, the cold slowly receding. Hannah and Laura stared at each other, their faces pale and drawn. They knew now that their fight was far from over. The spirit's torment was growing stronger, their desperation more palpable, and whatever darkness had trapped them was not going to let go without a fight. But they couldn't turn back, not now, not when so many souls were counting on them. With a trembling breath, Hannah whispered, "We'll find a way, we have to." And as the shadows watched, unseen and waiting, the two women steeled themselves for the battle to come. The hospital's dark history would not stay buried for much longer, and neither would the spirits who had been left behind.